Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Charlotte Mason Show. I am Julie Ross with some allergies, and I am,
Welcome to South Carolina in the spring.
I know, thank goodness, Shay is able to talk.
That was me on Monday, so we swapped. We didn't
Yeah,
even
right.
see each other, but we swapped.
But we wanted to go ahead with our book study so we can wrap that up. We are on book 2 in A Philosophy of Education. So she's gone through, laid the groundwork of her philosophy, talked about each of the chapter subjects and how to teach them. And the second part is theory applied, is what she calls it. So today we're going to be discussing a liberal education in both elementary and then in secondary schools. And just to be clear, by liberal, she means liberty, freedom, a wide feast.
Right.
Not what our modern definition.
Not a political stance.
Exactly. Right.
Right.
So let's dive into what that looks like in elementary schools. Since you have more of a voice than me, do you mind narrating?
Sure. Yeah, I really think these next two chapters are really rich. And she does repeat herself from some of the things that she said in the prior chapters. However, I think it's a little more succinct than some of the prior chapters, just because she's talking about, like she said, the theory applied in action. So she goes back and repeats herself about why we are choosing some of the things that we're choosing. But the end of the chapter, and we'll go back to the beginning, I think really states the whole overall the chapter, and that's that the solution which I hear proposed, is it not worth a trial? So she's basically saying, I just told you in this chapter what works for us, and I think you ought to try it.
Yeah.
Right. So I really think you ought to give it a shot. And yeah, so she starts out the talking about how we need to really provide, like you're saying, a liberal feast of information and what that means. And I love there's a quote here that I loved right as you dive in. And it says, I heard the other day of a man whose whole life had been elevated by a single inspiring poetic sentence, which he heard as a schoolboy.
Wow.
And even though that's one little phrase, I think that really is the overall arching theme of this, that we are wanting to inspire our elementary school children with a literary education, no matter what the topic, no matter what the subject is. And then she goes and talks about how she did that in each subject in the schools. She talks a lot about mind in this first section. And sometimes I just wish that we could hear her opinion about all the brain research that's going on now, don't you? Wouldn't you love to hear what she would think about all that? A lot of these great comments, like the requirements of the mind, are very much like the body, the metaphor that she uses over across all of her volumes. And then one of the things that she really gets me to, Julie, is on page 237 in my book, but she talks about what we don't do. And I put asterisks all the way around this because I'm starting a Charlotte Mason co-op this year. And one of the things I'm really trying to do is teach my teachers how not to do some of these things, how we don't show up just to entertain. So I want to read this quote and you tell me what you think about this. She says, what is the devitalization we notice in so many of our young people? Keen about games, but dead to things of the mind, is due to the processes carried on in our schools, to our plausible and pleasant ways of picturing, eliciting, demonstrating, illustrating, summarizing, doing all those things for children which they are born with the potency to do for themselves. No doubt we do give intellectual food, but too little of it. Let us have courage. I love that line. Let us have courage, and we shall be surprised, as we are now and then, at the amount of intellectual strong meat almost any child will take at a meal and digest at his leisure. So it's so easy for us to think that, we're learning a topic. How do we picture that for our children? How do we demonstrate it? Let's illustrate it for them. Let's summarize it. Let's do all this for them. But we never give them the meat to chew on. And I don't know about you, but it does take courage to jump in and believe that they really are going to do that for themselves. Less we believe, we have less respect for the child than we really should, which goes right back to our principles. And we are surprised if we will just put the food in front of them.
Yeah, I love, she says kind of at that bottom of that page about the wearyful task of spoon feeding.
Yes.
Pat meat, but the delightful commerce of equal minds, where his is the part of a guide, philosopher, and friend. So, yes, as teachers, we all fall into that trap, right, of spoon feeding, and our children then become passive learners. Their curiosity is deadened. They don't want to do the hard work of having to figure things out for themselves, because that is hard. Let's be honest.
So why should you, if you know somebody's going to spoon feed you that, why should you do that?
Right. Just tell me the important things and tell me what's going to be on the test.
Right. And then she talks. I wrote down so many quotes from these two chapters. I mean, just one after another. But she talks in there about that's why we don't get the attention that we expect, that we want from children. And I find that so many of the moms that I talk to will say, well, I tried that Charlotte Mason thing and I read some books and, my children just didn't pay attention, or they just weren't able to narrate. So we just moved on. But you're not having the courage to really actually implement that. And she talks about that later on in the chapters. I think it's in the secondary chapter. But it all goes back to that quote there and this is deep words, but she says, we must either reverence or despise children. And of course we don't despise our children.
Right.
But when we don't allow them to chew on the meat themselves, we're not reverencing them. Right. And their own capabilities and their own thoughts and connections that they're going to make for themselves.
Yeah. Throughout this whole chapter, I think the big theme is that children are born persons. Back to that first principle. Like she's just reiterating it over and over.
Over and over. Yes, she does. Over and over.
Mm-hmm. And I think the whole point of these two chapters here, or the second part of this volume, is this isn't just some nice philosophy that I made up.
Yes.
Is being used in lots of schools. So again, home education was written that parents would use this in their home. But by the time we get to volume 6 here, her programs have been used throughout the whole British Empire now, and they're used in schools. Mm-hmm. So she's saying you can use these principles in a class of 50 kids. Can you imagine, Shay?
No, because my first year of teaching, I had 30 kindergartners twice a day. So I had 60 students.
Wow.
Yeah, it was talk about controlled chaos, and sometimes not controlled, but yeah, this chapter has really been a great challenge for me. I mean, I just feel like God dropped it right in my lap for this particular time for me, because we are planning for co-op next year and choosing curriculum. And I'm really trying to help the moms consider, like, how do you teach? How do you craft a classroom environment that lends to these principles? Because a lot of them are used to doing this with their own children. So these are great points. How do you scale that for an actual classroom?
So you mentioned a few things that the teacher is not to do. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Okay, yes. So she talks about, let's see, let me see if I can find, she talks about really how important it is that the children are acting on the knowledge themselves. And those other things that we listed, those are things that we're doing in order for the child to try to get the information. She says on page 240, one thing at any rate we know with certainty, that no teaching, no information becomes knowledge to any of us until the individual mind has acted upon it, translated it, transformed it, absorbed it to reappear like our bodily food in forms of vitality. And this is, of course, I mean, you know that I've quoted this next sentence so many times, and I know that you have too, but we just can't skip it. Therefore, teaching, talk, and tell, however lucid or fascinating, effect nothing until self-activity be set up. That is, self-education is the only possible education. The rest is mere veneer laid on the surface of a child's nature. And I think when we're planning, whether it's for our own children in homeschooling, or whether it's like, I'm trying to think about this co-op sort of setting and how that would look for us. That's the kind of questions I need to ask myself. Am I chewing this food, this information, before I give it to the children, or I'm allowing them to have self-activity? Am I just like pasting a piece of construction paper on top of them that has no opportunity for them to really dig into and get their hands into themselves? And it's a big change, isn't it, from the way that we were educated? It's a big mind change.
Yes.
So I don't think it's simple to flip your brain over to those things. And it can seem overly simplified, because, we just actually got a message today. A lady said, well, where are all the extension activities that you're offering? Where are they? Do I get those if I purchase a Gentle Feast? Your children are perfectly capable. It's in them. We reverence them. We honor them. And we, like you said, go back to that first philosophy that they are capable of coming up with more extension activities than you would ever be able to keep them busy with if you came up with your own.
Right. Yes. And that they're, even in a big classroom, she's saying they can all narrate.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that section there. That I actually bookmarked all those. So I'm going to send those to all my co-op teachers. I'm going to type that out on page 241. The children, not the teachers, are the responsible persons. There must be some self-effort there.
Mm-hmm.
The actual work is done by the scholars, she says. And this is... It says they read in a term from 1,000 to between 2,000 and 3,000 pages. Did you notice that? According to age in class. Can you imagine if you actually said to, how many pages has your child read in school? I did not read that. I mean, I read at home because I was a super nerdy reader girl, but not for a school assignment.
No. Yeah, I feel like, again, it's just this kind of overview of here's how a child learns, here's how they don't learn, here are things not to include, like a bunch of talking from you.
Yes.
She mentions grammar rules, lists of names and dates, prizes.
Oh, yes,
grades,
I love that.
Marks, like
no note taking,
no
homework. No evening preparation, she calls it.
I know, man. Can you imagine that as teachers?
Like, you actually think that you're going to get all that stuff accomplished in school. And it is so rich. It is so rich. I mean, after following this philosophy for so many years now, I think you almost forget how much they're getting in that time period because the lessons are short. She gives some best practices on page 244 about how to read. You're reading 2 and 3 paragraphs with the intention that they'll know, with distinctness, force, and careful enunciation. But she also talks about how important it is that we're just putting them in contact with the author. That's what we're doing as a parent or a teacher. We don't have to try to re-explain all of the information that the author is putting forth.
Yes, right. And she talks again about like the timetables, um, for the younger grades, how important it is to stick to those, to build
Yes.
a habit of attention. Um, but Shay, I mean, do you ever just go, this just sounds too easy? But then when I talk to moms, they're like, oh, this is so complicated. I don't understand how to do the Charlotte Mason thing. Or like, people tell me I got to do all this stuff and I don't understand what this,
Right.
but you read this chapter, like you're
That's
reading
it.
and you're talking about it. You're
That's
reading
it.
and you're talking, like, that's so easy.
And she just keeps saying it over and over and over again. And anything that you're trying to stick in there between the reading and the talking about, after she says, stop, don't do that. But this is how our minds work. And I love the quote. She says, I think I could understand, mommy, if you did not explain quite so much. Did you read that? Is this the inarticulate cry of the school child today? Like, he really is capable of much more than he gets credit for. But she says we allow our admirable teaching to intervene between children and the knowledge their minds demand, because we have this power called curiosity. And we've discussed this in other chapters about the mind. But we have this incredible power to harness called curiosity. And when we start thinking, well, I need to talk about this, or I need to tell you what I think about this, or I've got to inject this activity, make sure that you feel like you have had fun.
Yes.
And you have been entertained.
Mm-hmm.
We are inserting ourselves, and we're downgrading that power of curiosity. That is exactly the thing that we moms as homeschoolers, we want.
Mm-hmm.
We want them to be curious. We want them to be pushing for more knowledge. And yet we're doing all these things to sort of, throw water on that flame over and over again. And then wondering, why are they not fired up about learning? Why are they not? Because we keep getting in the way. It's hard it's hard to hear when, you're like me, that I can plan you a unit study, girl. Listen now, I can plan you one. I did it for years, but that's not what they need.
Yeah.
And
What happens is, and research has shown this. Forget when the book came out, but Alfie Kahn, Punished by Rewards.
yes. Mm-hmm.
Can you hear that? Rewards. Sorry for me to say that word. That what happens is when you have a reward, for something, like she said, children are born with this natural curiosity. They want to learn. But what happens is now you're rewarding that, and either with prizes, stickers, you do this much work, you get to pull something from the treasure box, or by entertaining them and having these like super fun activities, and we're going to do all this stuff. And what happens over time, though, is the reward has to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because they never learned how to motivate themselves internally. So this external motivation has to keep coming, and it'll exponentially increase. So then when your kids are like 10 and 12, we get the notes going, well, my kid hates school, says it's boring.
Yes.
My kid doesn't think school's fun anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have deadened out all of their natural curiosity, and they want it got to be more entertaining today than it was last week.
That's right. And the only way to blow on that flame is exactly like she says here, is to put that literary form in front of them and really trust the process.
Mm-hmm.
And trust the process. And I do think, we have a lot of families that are, come over to Charlotte Mason philosophy from other manners of education. And sometimes I almost wish it wasn't even called Charlotte Mason philosophy. Sometimes I wish it was just called the way humans learn, right? The way humans learn best, because that's really what she was able to describe so succinctly.
Right.
And so clearly that had been going on. I mean, she didn't just come up with this. I mean, this has been going on for years and years, thousands of years. People have been learning this way. I mean, look at the ancient Greeks. I mean, we study them, and what did they do? They read the material that they had in front of them and they discussed it, right? Maybe using different ways, but it is possible to bring your children back to that that flame burning again of curiosity. But I do think it's exactly like she says, especially with these young children, you just really have to put the literary forms of books, the literary form of the material in front of them, and read a little bit and then stop, and then just sort of talk about it. And if they're not used to that, model it for them. May I tell you what I learned if you're struggling? Sure. And I'm just going to model. Okay. Well, or model it in other ways. Like, okay, I went to see a movie, or my friend Julie and I went to a play. Can I tell you about what we did? And you're modeling that, your own curiosity.
Yeah.
And it will come around, but it's not it's different. It's just different than us saying, well, you're not doing enough to entertain your child, so I'm not going to learn that way.
Right. And I think I see a lot of unit studies that are really just entertaining. You're making these things and you're doing these games, and you think your children are learning, and they're probably having a really great time, and so
Yes.
then again, they're going to want to keep doing that and not the reading and narrating part. But over time, you're deadening that curiosity, and those things are fun and they make really cute pictures. So it's not like you don't ever get to do anything like that. Those again can be done in the afternoon after you've done your lessons. And most of the time, though, it should be child-led, not you having to come up with all the games and activities and ideas, because again, that's not the work of their own self-education. When they're inspired by these living ideas, they're naturally going to incorporate that into their play. They're naturally going to quote, oh, can we make a recipe for hardtack like they were talking about in the book?
Yes.
But they're going to come up with their own ideas and things. Oh, Ben Franklin is in the bathtub. Let's try that at home. Like stuff like that.
Yes. And sometimes I think you do have to, like when we had used a unit study curriculum when we first started, and it just really stressed me out. I'm going to tell you, because I had to make sure I had all these supplies and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot the egg carton or whatever the thing was. I'm like, oh, it really stressed me out. And so when I read, For the Children's Sake, and begin to start, following Charlotte Mason's philosophy. So I did have to, and I was so inspired by this idea of masterly activity in the afternoon, like you're talking about, like a child pulling on. There were times like, okay, did you learn anything in this morning that you want to do something with? Like, think from your readings, is there anything you want to do this afternoon? Like, and my kids were huge. We had this huge sandbox, and you can't imagine the things that were acted out in that sandbox, from the readings. But sometimes it did help in the beginning when they weren't used to this, because like I said, I kind of deadened that curiosity.
Yeah.
Because I was creating all these wonderful experiences. But then, and she also makes the point here about why they can't answer questions. And so we get frustrated about, if a child, okay, well, why can't they answer these questions? Why don't they understand this? But, oh, we had this great unit study. We had this great experience. Well, it's because they did not actually interact with the information. And she talks about how, sometimes we get the books right, sometimes we get them wrong. I mean, I've read some books with my kids I really felt were living books, and I was like, that wasn't so great. And I can tell by their narration. And that's really a good guiding principle.
Right. Yeah. Or is there anything else in this elementary school section you wanted to touch on before we move to secondary?
Let's see. There's lots of great quotes there, but I think those are the biggest takeaways, is that if you can read this with the courage to examine your own self and to examine your habits. I really tried to read this with that in mind. Like, okay, Shay, really examine yourself, especially this time of year when like, okay, we're getting to the end now. We gotta, let's all right, let's, I get all worked up and excited about, okay, it's time to, we want to finish this. And so I can sort of not relax into the philosophy like really I need to. So I tried to read this with the sort of the light on myself. And I do want to read this one more quote, because this, I'm putting this in the front of my planner. And it says that education is part and parcel of religion. And every enthusiastic teacher knows that he is obeying the precept, feed my lambs. Feed with all those things which are good and wholesome for the spirit of a man, and before all, and including all, with the knowledge of God. And that was just a reminder to me that when we're reading these rich books, you know, my daughter's reading of course I can't remember the name. It's one of the all about electricity. And when she narrates, I can hear the principles in there about the knowledge of God, the way that, you know, I can hear that in the knowledge of the universe, but I don't have to explain that to her, because the Holy Spirit inside her is going to do that for her in the way that she needs to hear that. And so I think that's just we are feeding these little lambs in such a incredible privilege. So
yeah, that's a really great.
good
Oh yeah, such a great quote, such a great reminder too of, you know, like you're saying, like this time of year towards the end of the school year, we can become weary, right? You know, and to remember our calling for that. And I think important here in this first part, and then also transitioning to secondary schools, is that she's saying this type of education works for every child. And you know, coming from her time period, there's a great class distinction. World War I kind of eliminated some of that, but still very much class distinction. She's saying, you know, we're taking this principles and we're taking them into schools where kids have not had much of an education, and we're seeing them transform. And so this works for all students.
Right. And oh my goodness, the questions we get about that. I mean, so many questions like, you know, will this work for my fill in the blank kid? Will this work for my fill in the blank kid? Yes, it will. You might have to, you know, adjust some different things like time periods or the book level or how long you read or something like that. But yes, it will work for them.
All right. So what is she saying then about, well, first of all, you know, secondary schools in England in this time we're not talking about high school. So this would be more like middle school. We'll get to high school later. Just to clarify, because nowadays that's secondary term. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that she goes through and she sort of says, this is the mess that we have. You know, I mean, she gives lots of examples. I had to look up a lot of these. I don't have the annotated version. So I spent a lot of time saying, I don't know who this person is. I don't know who this person is. I don't, you know, sort of looking at these people. But basically, the what she's trying to do is explain what does not work and what is not going well and how do we observe that. And she says this particular method of education that I have, does it address those issues? Does it? And then she goes through the rest of the chapter and she says, yes, it does. And she sort of proves herself how it does. She gives lots of examples and of what she's done. One thing I was like, yes, girl, I feel you. She said on page 253, she's talking about every boy resists in a mulish way, attempts to teach him. I'm like, yeah, I had some of those mulish boys. They're graduated now, but we made it. She says, but with the average boy, a gallon of teaching produces scarce a gill of learning. And what is the master to do? It is something to know, however, that behind all this mulishness, there is an avidity for knowledge. So she's saying that it doesn't make a difference. Like we think of, you know, middle school years. Okay, well, now the fun stuff. Well, at least when I was learning to be a teacher, they kind of were very clear. Fun stuff is over like sixth grade. Okay. If you're going to teach sixth, seventh, eighth grade, you know, you're going to get your upper elementary certification. You got to really know your subject matter because the fun is done. There's no more construction paper and glue sticks, right? After that. But she really says, in my philosophy, she says, there's no difference there. And she does a great job restating like a court through page 254 about exactly what we just talked about in the previous chapter. What is the curriculum? Knowledge of man, knowledge of God, those sort of things. And she just restates herself. Knowledge is that which we know, and the learner knows only by definite act of knowing, which he performs for himself.
Keep going, because the next part's the best.
Yeah. But appalling incuria blocks the way. Boys and girls do not want to know, therefore they do not know. And their future intellectual requirements will be satisfied by bridge at night and golf by day. I love that. I put LOL in my.
I know, it cracks me up.
Some of the stuff that she says is just so it's just so funny.
But I mean, it's true. I mean, nowadays it would be social media, Netflix, right?
That's right. Yeah.
But if they don't want to know, so they're not going to. They're not going to take those mental efforts, right? Because we trained them how to be passive, so they don't want to. And then they'll just continue wanting to be entertained as adults.
That's right. And I do think it's normal, I mean, to see that pushback from your child.
Yeah, exactly.
Like age 12, 13, 14. I get it. I mean, but it's dangerous for us to take that pushback as if we need to change the philosophy or we need to change the methods. That's just the normal pushback in my experience as a parent, which she wasn't a parent. And so, you know, as a parent, I think that pushback, it comes from the independence that they need to eventually gain. And it can really be harnessed. I think when you harness their curiosity, so that's around the age, like my daughter's going into 7th grade next year. And so I'm allowing her to pick some of her extra subjects for next year. Some of the extra things. I'm going to kind of try to harness that mulishness. What else do you see there? Do you want to
Yeah, again, I mean, these principles are the same in secondary as they are in elementary. You have to have knowledge in literary form. They're reading, they're narrating. It's, you know, we're not changing everything because now they're in middle school. It's the same thing.
No games, no arts and crafts or playways, like she says. I mean, I'm telling you, if you took this and you went into like the typical classroom where I used to teach and you said, okay, no longer can you do these things, we'd be left with nothing but the books.
There's nothing.
Yeah, nothing but the books. And then it would be like, well, we can't do that, you know, and that's so. I do want to point this one thing out. She talks about the sciences and she does address field work and how that is important for those secondary and middle school ages. And I just love that because you do have an opportunity. Some of these great books, like especially in the natural history books, there's an awesome opportunity for field work. So you're going out like the Handbook of Nature Study. I mean, that is not meant to be something that you're just going to sit down in their laps. You're going to walk out, you're going to look at these plants, you're going to learn about these particular trees or whatever. So there is field work. That's where some of the hands-on stuff happens too for that age. It's not like it's not there. It's just we're not pre-planning it for them.
Yes, but you're providing the feast because in order for them to do the field work, you have to have a nature journal. You have to have the habit of spending time outside. You have to build that into your calendar. You have to teach them kind of some of the rudimentary things of brush drawing, observing, and those kind of things, and some of that background of nature study and science. That when they can go do that field work, you know, they have the tools that they need. So that's on us as the parent to kind of, lay that. In handicraft, same way. In elementary school, you're doing them with them and you're showing them how to do it. And, you know, I tried to do a variety of things because I'm not good at any handicraft. And so it was like, okay, let's try this. Okay, let's try this. You know, but then when they're in this age, they can kind of take some ownership of that. Like you're saying, okay, what skill do you want to learn? But it's a hands-on thing that's developing so much inside of the child, like especially like think of handicrafts, you know, the ability to pay attention to detail. You have to be very accurate. You have to, you know, be able to read and process instructions. And so they're working with their hands. People are like, I want more hands-on learning. What they're learning all morning. They're working with their hands in the afternoons, and the hands are also building all these kind of intellectual skills. But it's not
Yes.
when you're doing, I don't know, I'm trying to think, like people always laugh, like the Salto map of Egypt or whatever.
Yes. Yes.
That's the example we always use. The Salto map of Egypt, what are they learning? Are they learning those skills? Are they following directions? Are they
Yes.
learning accuracy? Are they learning measuring skills? Not really,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
Um,
Right.
it's fun, but is that really going to enhance their knowledge as much as it would be to read a travel book about traveling through Egypt and what you would see along the Nile? And their imagination goes, and then maybe in the afternoon they do want to do something creative with it in the sandbox, like you're saying.
Right.
But it's not us having to prescribe it and come up with it all themselves. And again, because that kind of deprecates the child. That's the word she uses.
Yes. Mhm. And I think it's important, like that's why philosophy is so important, because when I have a tendency to think, okay, philosophy is my filter. So when I'm wondering, do I need to include this? Is this a quote activity that's important? Well, does it fit the philosophy? Then I use that philosophy as a filter. So if it's something I'm going to like work really hard getting all these materials together and just sort of say, oh, hey, we're going to come up with this product right here. Watch this. Well, that doesn't fit the philosophy. So I don't need to waste my time doing that. So a lot of it is defining what hands on actually means. You know, there is hands on learning, but if you're looking for a pre-packaged option, no, we don't, we're not going to, we're not going to find that in Charlotte Mason, but it's because it doesn't light up the curiosity of the brain. We want things that do that. Let's make best practices for the time and the effort that we're trying to, that we're trying to do with these children and not waste our time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, she just iterates the importance of having living books, the importance of narrating. It's the same thing. There's nothing like.
Yep. Says it over and over.
Yep.
Yep. Yep. Here's what you do, here's what you don't do. She goes and talks about I love it. She says, of course they will not be able to answer questions because questions are an impertinence which we all resent. Because I don't, maybe that's not what I learned there. And she talks about the mind again here, and that list that she puts on 262 of the did you see that of the, I mean, come on, how many? She says 200 names that one term's work by a child of 11 in Form 2 is able to know.
Yeah.
It's impressive, right?
Impressive list, yes.
And I think it would be interesting if we actually sat our child. I've never done that, but if you went through and said, hey, let's write a list of names that it's so much more than I could have ever given them because I've learned stuff for the test. And then 2 weeks later, they'd be like, so what was the emperor of Rome? I'm like, didn't I make an A on my test?
Yes, and I think a big important detail in the older grades. She says several forums get through a great deal of reading because we have discovered that a single reading suffices to secure a knowledge given the right book. Therefore, many books are necessary. So, people look at this like book list and are like, this is a lot of books. I love it where like they take pictures at the end of the term with like the books stacked up next to the kid.
Yes.
But because they're able to read so much more in a short amount of time because you're not adding all this busy work.
No, and you just read, and she says the consecutive readings. And she talks about how reading these books like this levels the playing field, right? Like you talked about, even in the secondary education, because it says the people wait only for the right books to be put into their hands and the right method to be employed. That's what these children are waiting on, whether they're grades 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever. She talks about how important that is. And yet we often think, well, my kid is a 7th grader and just doesn't like to read. well, my kids in 8th grade just doesn't like to read. Well, I mean, if you went and asked my 6th grader, as many books as we read, hey, do you like to read? She's going to say, no, I don't like to read.
My son was saying something. He's like, I'd rather be out in the woods. Thanks.
Same. She's like, I'd rather be playing softball. I would really rather not read. But because she doesn't know any different than this is the only thing she's ever done. When she does read, she's not going to admit it because she's 12 years old, but you can see the lights. Okay, yes, I learned about this. Oh, wait, isn't that the same thing as this person did? Oh, wait, what about this? You can see the lights come on.
Yeah. And I love how she puts, children so taught are delightful companions.
Oh, yes.
They have large interests and worthy thoughts. They have much to talk about, and such casual talk benefits society. And I love talking to children who have gone through this, right? They do. They're delightful to talk to. They have so many ideas in their head and so many connections that they've made, and such a wealth of knowledge that they can carry on these conversations.
And I don't think most of them even realize it. You know, I mean,
I think everybody's like that.
Right. They think everybody's like that. I wish I had been. I'm trying to re-educate myself in that way. And I think also what I love is, and this is super important, I feel in the work that I do, is that how important it is to really understand the principles. She says, I feel strongly that to attempt to work this method without a firm adherence to the few principles laid down would be not only idle but disastrous. And she's trying to explain there, if you just look at this, like you said, this is just a book list and all we're going to do is just look at these books and read, but you're not carrying out these considering the narration and considering the types of books that there are. I mean, I don't know about you, but I can tell pretty much right away if a book that I'm just giving a shot to, I'm like, well, I think this book now, if it's not a tried and true book,
right.
I found this book, let's just give it a shot. If the narration's I'm like, it's not a literary book.
Right.
I can tell a difference. So when we tell people stick with it, stick with it, stick with it, and really, this is why we insist upon the use of books, she says. Stick with it, follow the philosophy, then you get less frustrated because you're trusting the philosophy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's so important. She goes on kind of towards the end of this and goes more subject by subject again.
Yep. She does. Yep.
Like, just in case you missed it the last time.
Yeah, she breaks it down again for you. Why we need to include these things. She makes the point that you and I've made before about composition, about how it requires no special attention until the pupil is old enough to naturally take a critical interest in the use of words. So all you mamas who are freaking out because your 5th grader cannot write an essay, take a deep breath and it's all going to be okay.
Yeah, and she talks in here about spelling too, which we haven't really.
Oh, yes. Lots of questions about spelling.
And, she says, well, yeah, see my voice. Can you read it? It's on page 271, which
sure. Which
spelling.
Yeah, I marked several of those.
This is more of it's impossible to teach.
Yeah, teach children. And moreover, it is impossible to teach children to spell when they do not read for themselves. We hear complaints of the difficulties of spelling, of the necessity to do violence to the language, which is dear to us all, in order to, quote, make spelling made easy. But in thousands of cases that come before us, we find that children who use their books for themselves spell well because they visualize the words they read. I have found that to be true. I tried every spelling thing there was when my kids were younger, and I thought I needed it. And the only thing that ever had any carryover whatsoever was just reading, and then studied copywork and dictation. That was it. That's the only thing.
And when I talk to parents that you say my kid's struggling with spelling, I'm like, well, are they reading their own books for themselves yet? Even if, they're just, they, might be listening to like an audiobook, have them follow along with the actual book. so they can see how
Right.
the words are actually spelled is so important. And then I'm like, are you consistently doing copywork and dictation? Oh, well, no, not really. Well, there's the answer. You have to do it every day.
Do. Yes. And it really does. I mean, my kids don't, they don't love dictation. You know, I mean, when we pull it out on Friday, they don't love it, but really because by then, which I think this is one is so powerful, by then they're like, you're just asking me to do something I already know so well, which is the point. Which is the point. That's the point, that you want them to feel like they know it so well and how to spell those words so well that it's just, you're going to read it, I'm going to write it, and then we're going to move on. And it's already cemented in their minds.
Right. I just wanted to touch on that because that's something that comes up a lot.
Yes. Yeah, she covered everything here. Literature, history. She goes back and talks about the music, great pictures, the teaching of languages she addresses. And then she says, there's one more thing I need to discuss. And she says it in just a quote: education must be in touch with life. We must learn what we desire to know. And that's really the underlying theme, isn't it? Is that we cannot force our children to desire to know something. As much as
like
we
to
want.
try, don't we?
Oh yes, I was reading that saying, "Ooh, okay."
Yeah,
You
can I
know,
prod and pull and try to motivate and do all this work myself?
Mhm. And we wonder why we're frustrated, and yet we're literally going against the way that our children's brains were created. We are fighting against the creation itself and and our children. We're fighting against them. And I love it goes back to that quote you read earlier there. We want to have that pleasant relationship with our children where we're coming alongside them. You know, we
A
want.
philosopher and friend, like,
Yes,
that's awesome. Thanks.
a
I'll do that.
philosophy. Yeah, and what a better way to help a child see that in themselves. Like, you need to see yourself as the philosopher. You need to see yourself as the learner. You need to see yourself as the one that's motivated. And that's where the work comes in. The work is not in the, oh, I got to plan for 30 minutes on this lesson. I got to plan for an hour on this lesson. I got to lay all this stuff out. There are ways to not have to do that kind of planning. Where the effort comes in is stepping back and and that can feel like a lot of work, to step back and let your child pull that information out, to watch them grapple with that difficult book. And what does this idea mean? Or what does that phrase mean? Or even a piece of poetry as you read it. Well, what do you think that image is? Like, I'm not going to regurgitate that for you. What do you think? Like, what do you think that image means? And that's where the work comes in. And it's quite different than what a box curriculum is going to give you if you're just reading a textbook with facts and information in it.
Yeah. And one thing I'd love to address is this notion of my child needs to think school's fun.
Oh, yes, girl.
And if they don't think it's fun, then I'm doing something wrong. I had a parent message me about that a couple weeks ago. And, what do you think I should do? I'm like, nothing. Just keep on doing what you've been doing.
Yes. Yep.
Make sure you're not doing these things you're not supposed to be doing.
Yes.
But just keep on reading, narrating. And I said, I started going back to the gym a couple months ago, and I have a trainer. And do I think it's fun ever? No. Nope. Right. I don't know. Every morning when my alarm goes off, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going. Do I feel good afterward? Yes. Do I know it's helping me have more energy and helping my body? Yes. I feel great afterward. Do I want to do it at the beginning? No. So when our children resist, right, it's that natural human tendency to go, well, I'd much rather be entertained.
100%.
I'd much rather watch Netflix than go to the gym.
Yes. Especially when there's so many options now for us to be entertained, even educationally. Like
Yes.
it's much easier to read an educationally entertaining book about a topic than
Mhm.
it is to read a book that has literary value.
Mhm.
And, there's all this, of course, there's controversy a little over the word twaddle and what that is. And it's a term that she uses in some of her, but I think it's easy to find because if you're reading something that, or you're putting in front of your children something that's so dumbed down that all it is fun, then their brain does not have to do that effort. And like you said, it is effort, and we are humans. We would all like to get out of the effort, right? I mean, even when I reread these chapters, there's like the beginning of this one, I thought, okay, I don't know who these people are. Like, I'm going to have to look all this stuff up. I don't recognize them. I don't have the annotated version. So I'm like, I have no idea who this is. I have no idea she's talking about. But after I do it, I can understand what she's saying, and you can feel that curiosity in yourself be perked, that flame be picking up a little bit. And we just don't get a lot of encouragement for that. I'm so glad that you made that point. We get a lot of Facebook questions about it.
Yeah, and recently too, I saw one today about a book, The Chestry Oak by who wrote that? Tell me.
Oh, I can't remember. I'm not terrible. I have to look
We'll
up.
put it. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yes.
Chestry Oak, right?
Yes.
And we've been plodding along. Please tell me this gets better. My kids don't like it. We stopped after page 27 because we didn't like it. And I was like, no, you're missing. And so many other people were like, keep going. Like it's worth it. It is so worth it. And but we've gotten that about many books,
We have. Kate Sarity.
Yes, I knew it started with a K. Thank you, Kate Sarity. So what would you have to say about kind of that approach?
Reading a different, I think my suggestion is that if it's a book that's tried and true, especially, right, there are books out there that we have
Yes.
read that were not, they were not a good fit. They were not a living book. But if it's a living book like the Chestry Oak, which is amazing, and another one that we got some questions about was Red Cells to Capri.
Yes.
Oh, love those books. But the reason it's worth continuing on is because somebody has got to teach your children the perseverance of mind.
Yes, this is what I was hoping you were going to say.
nobody else is going to do it. The world we live in is not going to do it. And not just because we live in this society or culture. I think traditionally it's just humanity finds the easiest route, right? But perseverance of mind is only going to come if you teach them perseverance of mind. And that's really what she's talking about in these two chapters. She breaks it down in many different forms.
Yep.
But we must teach the perseverance of mind, which is a habit. We must focus on the habit of attention, and we must believe that our children are capable of that. So when we say this book is not fun, oh, you don't like this book, okay, well, maybe we'll pick another one. We are saying to our children, you are not capable of that habit of attention and the perseverance of mind.
Yep.
But I do believe that you are. So I can choose another way. I can say, maybe we're grappling with this book a little bit. Maybe there's some tough ideas, but we're going to keep reading this book. We're going to stick with it. And we're going to see what happens to these characters, and we're going to see what connections we can make, and we're going to continue on. And every book that I have ever done that with, every single one, I have been so grateful that I stuck with it. I mean, Alice in Wonderland is one. I know people read this book and they're like, well, we didn't understand it. It's okay. But the cultural significance of that book is enough of a reason to continue to read that book, even if it's not your favorite. And there's a lot of ones that are like that out there. So That's my take on stopping a book or giving up, or I'm not saying you never switch out. Of course, there's time you may switch a book. But there have been rare times that we have chosen to stop a book because somebody quote unquote doesn't like the book.
Right. And I think that just is a great way to summarize these whole couple
It
chapters,
really is. Yes.
that you're building this mental muscle. It takes effort. It's simple. It's not involving a bunch of stuff, right? It does take courage and it does take faith, but over time, that muscle is getting built through that. And same with you, like all the books that I wanted to stop or my kids didn't like or they complained through, by the time we got to the end, we were all so grateful that we did it. The amount of connections and ideas that they had,
Yes.
and that, the ideas grow. So the next book adds to that, and my kids will still, say some book they read when they were 5 or 6. They'll be like, that was my favorite book, when they see it, when I bring it out for whatever. And I'm like, you fought me on that book like every day. Like, no, you don't remember. Now you have these like sweet little memories of like, this is the best book ever, but I'm just like, while we were doing it, it was like,
yes, we've been through that exact same thing. And then later on, they are able to really see the value that they were not able to see in their maturity level at that particular time. So we trust in the brain and their capabilities, but we don't give in to that particular maturity level that might say, well, I just want to stop. And we just keep going forward.
Can you read to close here, can you read the quote at the top of page 278?
Sure. This is the way to make great men, and not by petty efforts to form character in this direction or in that. Let us take it to ourselves that great character comes out of great thoughts, and that great thought must be initiated by great thinkers. Then we shall have a definite aim in education. Thinking and not doing is the source of character. I mean, what more can you say to that, right?
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Shay, for talking through most of this. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's always fun, and I hope you get your voice back really soon.
Thank you.